Hey everybody, CJ Maurer here with Complete Payroll, and welcome to another episode of PeopleWork. We have been focusing a lot on employee background checks and creating a lot of content about why employers run employee background checks, the different regulations that govern how employee background checks should be administered, and the benefits that a lot of organizations realize by screening their candidates before making a formal offer of employment. So that's why today I'm super excited to welcome Tammy Tucker. Tammy Tucker is with National Crime Search, which is a nationwide provider of employee background checks and a variety of other screening solutions, and is in fact a partner of Complete Payroll. So Tammy, thank you so much and welcome to PeopleWork.
All right. Thank you, CJ, for having me. And thank you for your partnership. We certainly enjoy working with you.
Tammy, before we get started, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background, how you got here, how you got into this line of work?
It's actually kind of a crazy story. My background is really in journalism. And then I ended up working for my university here in Arkansas as a communications person. And I was ready for a change, and they had an opening here. A good friend of mine does our programming here, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come join our team? You'd be a great fit. You'll love it here." So I've been here now right at 3 years and loving it. It's a great group of people.
That's really cool. What have you found most interesting about working in the background check industry?
I have learned so much. I had no idea how background screening worked and all the regulations that you were talking about and the crazy things that you see that pop up on people's records. It's kind of definitely a learning experience to see what all people have been charged with, and you think, wow, it's kind of a crazy world out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember when I was being hired at Complete Payroll, there was they extended me an employment offer that was contingent upon a background check, and all of a sudden they said they were running a background check on me, and all of a sudden I got nervous and started thinking about, man, did I commit some crime that I don't know about or don't? It was really weird, when somebody says they're running a background check on you, and I'm sure that I've applied for a job before where they've ran a background check on me before, but this was really just the most recent memory. But working for Complete Payroll and understanding how we help a lot of our clients in the payroll, HR, labor law, and administrative capacity, you realize that they're actually like a pretty commonplace function. That a lot of employers rely on to make sure that they're getting the right candidates and they're not going to make ultimately a disastrous hire. So I even actually read a statistic that about 70% of private sector employees, or maybe or employers, or maybe it's all employers. I'll have to double check that. Actually, close to 70% of employers run background checks on potential new candidates. So I was curious, do you want to kind of explain why employers do that in the first place for those that it may not be obvious to, like myself?
Well, I wish 100% ran background checks. That would save a lot of companies a lot of time, money, and trouble, because we hear stories all the time. People call us and say, "Oh, I've hired this person, and now I found out that they committed murder." And, they've been released from prison, but you don't necessarily want that person in your office, or hiring someone who has embezzled in the past. They've done their time, but, if they're handling money, do you really want that person in your office? Those are things you want to know before you hire them. And to throw another statistic out there, about 50% of resumes or applications actually contain false information. So background checks help verify that what you're telling you is correct, that their experience and their education is correct. We verify all those things. So you really know the trustworthiness and character of the person that you're hiring. You know their background. So you're definitely showing your employees that you want to have a safe workplace and that you're hiring quality people, and you're hiring the people who fit that specific job with their experience and their education.
50%. That's quite a staggering number, especially when you think about just how many people are constantly looking at applications and resumes, to be considered for
Right.
employment. Um, how self-conscious that must make a lot of employers and hiring managers when realizing that they may not be so quick to trust a lot of the information. I also thought what you said about like the criminal record was interesting. A couple of weeks ago, we had on an insurance broker named Jeff Lionmark, and he actually talked about the risk that employers incur when they have employees who drive on behalf of the company,
Yes.
um, and why employers may want to consider having their employees increase their personal coverage limits. And that doesn't even get into employees who actually are drivers too. And when you just think about all the different motor vehicle infractions and things like that, and how much that might play into it, um, I think that's really interesting because I do understand that one component of um, one aspect of a background check will be, looking into a motor vehicle history, correct?
Correct. We work with a lot of trucking companies, even fast food restaurants, maybe pizza delivery. You don't want to have your pizza delivery person be a convicted robber or have a crazy driving record with tons of tickets and reckless driving out there on your representing your company.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when should employers go about running background checks on candidates?
Definitely before they are on your payroll. But a lot of state laws regulate, and even federal laws now. You may have heard of ban the box. It's a huge trend right now, and it's catching on in a lot of different states and in different cities, counties across the nation. And so that really determines when. In most states now, you can't run a background check legally until you've extended an offer contingent upon the background check. So once you get past that interview process, you no longer can put on the application, have you ever been convicted? You may have seen that before on an application. In most states, that is no longer allowed. You can't ask about criminal history until you've extended that offer. So it's not saying don't do a background check. It's just saying you have to wait until you're ready to offer them that job.
Interesting. What type of information do you think that most employers should be looking for in a background check on a potential candidate?
Across the board, everyone should be looking for any kind of misdemeanor, felony that's related to that job position. If say it's just a clerical position, you probably don't care about a speeding ticket they got 3 months ago. That's not relevant to that job. But you're going to be looking for any kind of felony, definitely, and then any kind of misdemeanor. Maybe if they handle money, you're looking for a credit report to make sure they're responsible financially and how they handle their money. And you just want to make sure that what you're looking for is related to that position. We see a lot of people who they might have a criminal record, but it has nothing to do with the job that they're doing. And so the employer says, we're not worried about that, and they'll go ahead and hire them.
Hmm. Um, what This might be a hard question to answer, so forgive me for asking it.
That's okay.
But I'm wondering, are there common red flags that show up in employee background checks that you think are very common deterrents for employers to rescind that um, contingent job offer following a background check result?
One of them would be anyone who's on the sex offender registry. When you see a sex offender, most people definitely that's a red flag, no matter what the office is. But definitely if it's a church volunteer or anyone who's around children, that's a huge red flag. Usually, any kind of burglary, if they're robbing someone's house or business, it could very well happen in your office also. So that's a big red flag.
You, I'm aware that you guys also do volunteer screening. So you just mentioned if this person was a church volunteer. What's the difference between employment, typical, running background checks for employment, and for like volunteer screenings?
There's really not a difference. The packages that we offer are really they're looking for the same criminal history. You're still looking for your misdemeanors, felonies, sex offender registry, anything like that. With us, we try to help out volunteer organizations and nonprofits and help them with their budget and give a discount. But as far as what they're looking for, it's really the same.
I also understand that large components of background checks include employment history and education history. Now, you mentioned that up to 50% of applicants either provide false or misleading information on their their resumes or their applications. Uh, is looking into their employment and education history, because that's different from like a criminal record or
Right.
a offender list or something like that. Um, is that mostly just a way to make sure what they're saying is true, or is there anything else to learn from looking into employment and education history?
You're right. It's really just to make sure that it's true. And if you have a position that requires a doctorate degree, you want to make sure that that person, they put it on a piece of paper, but do they really have that diploma? You'd be surprised how many people think, oh, this little white lie won't matter. And then it turns out they don't really have any degrees.
Mm,
And if they lie to you about that, what else are they going to lie about in the future?
yeah,
It's a character issue.
yeah. Um, so I'm somebody who, you know, thinks of myself as somebody who can solve a lot of problems through Google, and obviously with the amount of information that exists on the web today, a lot of us amateurs can do a lot of different things on the internet that in generations past was always strictly left to professionals.
Mhm.
So what's stopping somebody from trying to Google a potential candidate and kind of conducting an amateur background check on this candidate through Google? And why is it important to work with an accredited provider of background checks?
That is a question that we get all the time. And to be honest, it drives us crazy because someone will call and say, well, I Googled this person's name. This newspaper article came up and said that they um, had this, they murdered someone or they robbed this business. And I don't see that on the background check that you have. Well, because we have regulations and we're following the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is a federal law, we know that you can't report arrests or any criminal records that were expunged or dismissed. And you don't know by reading that newspaper article necessarily what was the outcome of that scenario, that situation. So you can't always trust Google. Google's great, but not necessarily when you're trying to follow rules and regulations for background screening. So we always recommend that use a trustworthy background screening company because we do know what can be reported and what can be used in the hiring process because you don't want to get in trouble legally because you use something that you found on Google, which turns out can't be used in the hiring process.
Yeah, that's a good point. You brought up the Fair Credit Reporting Act. We recently published a blog post about that, so I'll make sure that we link to it here.
Okay.
Um, but for those people who aren't familiar with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, why don't you kind of give a basic overview of what it is and how it governs how background checks are administered?
So the Fair Credit Reporting Act, or the FCRA as we refer to it, governs any kind of consumer reporting agency, which is what we're considered to be as a background screening company. And it basically gives us rules like the time frame for how far back records can be shown on a person's background search. Typically we can only do misdemeanors to 7 years and felonies basically 10 years. And that's because, in their eyes, if someone has committed a crime and they've done their time and they've done their punishment for that, then to be fair, they should have another shot in society at getting a job and turning their life around. So that's one reason that was created. And the other part that it governs is making sure that we have permission to run that background search. We have an authorization form that has to be signed. We can't release any results without that because it would be an illegal search technically. We have to have that person's permission.
Interesting. What myths or misconceptions do you find that anybody, but maybe especially employers, have about background checks?
There are two big ones. One of the biggest is people think there's this all encompassing database out there that we all use and it can pull any record anytime from anywhere. And that's really not the case. We spend a lot of time educating our clients. There is a database, but what is uploaded to it and how frequently and how detailed depends on the source. So we have a coverage area document that we refer to. It tells us in every state what county, what court, what maybe the Department of Correction or Department of Justice, who is uploading to this database, how often. And some states have gone historic, and so they're no longer updating, so you can't really rely on that. So we supplement those searches with other county criminal, more up-to-date searches. So that's one big myth, that this one database can just do everything. That's not the case. The other myth, people think that criminal records are pulled by social security number. That's not the case. They're actually pulled by first name, last name, and date of birth. So people will call and say, "Oh, I entered the wrong social security number." It's like, well, that's okay, because it's actually name and date of birth. We just use social security for address history to see where we need to go deeper on that person.
Are you noticing any trends in the background check industry right now?
The biggest one is the ban the box. So that definitely affects when you're running that background search. And the other one is we're seeing a lot of states who have budget cuts. California is probably the biggest one affected right now. So they're cutting back on how many county clerk assistants they have, which means they might say, well, you can only go in and get 4 background searches today. So that unfortunately delays sometimes getting those results, because they're just kind of putting that on the back burner as far as priorities. So that's really affecting some searches right now.
Tammy, what would you say to an employer or hiring manager that is looking to hire a new employee but has never done a background check before? What advice would you give them?
Definitely find a trustworthy background screening company and do a background check, because you want to make sure on the front end that you're hiring the right person rather than finding that out after they've been there a few months. And then just working with your background screening company, whether it's us or someone else, on getting the right search, making sure that you're looking at that position, looking at your industry and what you're needing in that search, just to make sure that you're not missing something. And that's something that we do all day, every day, is talk to clients and making sure they're getting the right coverage on those searches.
What's the typical turnaround time for a background check?
Part of it, that database that we talked about earlier, is automatic. So that comes back typically within a few minutes. If there are records or hits that come back, we do verifications on those. So those usually involve county criminal searches, and those can take, depending on the states or county, that can take about 5 days for that part.
Okay, interesting. Tammy, I have to say that I believe I've asked, and you have certainly answered all the questions I came here to ask. Is there anything else that you thought of during this conversation that you think our viewers might be interested to know that you'd like to share?
One thing we've talked about, planning ahead, is something that we haven't really mentioned, because we were talking about turnaround times. Some people will wait, oh, I'm trying to hire this person on Monday, and they're calling us at 5 o'clock on Friday saying, I need this now. Well, sometimes it does take time to make sure that we're getting the right information out there. So definitely planning ahead if you're hiring this person, just making sure that you give yourself enough time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, 5 days isn't very long to really
Right.
you're not exposing your business to significant
Right.
liability by hiring the right candidate. So
And some of those deeper background screenings can get uh, kind of pricey, but in our opinion, it's worth it to know that you're hiring the right person and you're ensuring that safety in the workplace. So to us, it's worth that amount to get that screening done properly.
sure, yeah. I mean, people pay a lot more money for insurance policies to protect the business. In a lot of ways, this is kind of like a little insurance policy to just to make sure that you're bringing on the right people.
Right, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, we do. As a payroll company, we do mostly payroll, but we also provide HR, time and attendance, and we talk to a lot of experts in those fields. And um, we talk a lot about the importance of people. After all, this series is called PeopleWork, right?
Right.
It's people who work in the various disciplines of managing and developing people and a workforce. At the end of the day, your company is as good as your people are, and any measures that you can take to not only make sure that you are bringing on only the best apples, but you're weeding out some of the bad apples, is definitely one that pretty much any HR expert I would have spoken with would wholeheartedly endorse.
Right,
So
because it costs a lot more to have to fire someone and rehire someone than it does to do a background check.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, Tammy, I have to say thank you so much for coming on. I feel like you've provided a wealth of information and insight, and hopefully this isn't the last time we do this, because we all know how important background checks and finding the right candidates are. And as I said at the beginning of this video, Tammy and National Crime Search are a partner of Complete Payroll. They've been a really great partner in helping us provide background check services to our employees, but more so than that, just being a really good resource for insight and education into why this is really important. I've really enjoyed this. I'm going to make sure that we give our viewers a lot of opportunities to learn more about you guys and provide more information. But first of all, on behalf of me and the entire company and everybody who's following along, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'd love to do it again.
Cool. Talk to you soon.
Bye.